and we've seen some really robust demand for this product. Again, we certainly recognize in the financial industry, or the financial services industry, that small businesses really need this funding. So it's a little bit about what this second draw means. And Tanya had solicited some questions from the membership prior to this meeting. She forwarded those along to me, and I mentioned to Tanya before this meeting that it almost seems like somebody went out to the Wells Fargo PPP site and pulled up our FAQ and just wrote down everything, because it falls right in line with our FAQ website on PPP. And Tanya is going to be sharing that with those of you on the line right now, either during this meeting or afterwards. She'll get it out to everybody. But we've got a really robust FAQ for PPP. There's a lot of questions around this, and I'm sure many of you remember back early April last year, there was just a ton of information and a lot of misinformation around PPP and what was going on, and almost a never-ending list of regulations that were changed and then changed again. And it just seemed like, it was really difficult for the SBA to get this program rolled out. There were a lot of questions. There were a lot of questions around not only eligibility. There were a lot of changes that were made around eligibility, changes that were made around how the funds could be used, and then changes that were made around forgiveness. So we're going to dive into a lot of those things this afternoon. First of all, eligibility for the second draw, but also I want to take some time and talk about forgiveness as well, because I know that that's top of people's minds as well. This is a program that the government rolled out with the intention that these funds be used for payroll, and as a result of using those funds for payroll and other expenses, including utilities and rent, that obligation would be forgiven. This was by no means an opportunity for the banks to make money. If you look at it, the PPP loan, it's a 1% loan if you don't get forgiveness. So not a profitable venture for the banking industry, but something that we're more than willing to help execute for the government in order to get this funding to the small businesses. So diving in a little bit about PPP eligibility. So regardless of whether it's first draw or second, I guess maybe we'll start there. When I talk about first draw or second draw, the first draw would have been, well, meaning you have not previously taken a draw from Paycheck Protection Program. So if you did not participate in the funding that happened in April or in June, if you've never taken a PPP loan, then you can apply for PPP funding right now, and you would be considered a first draw participant. If you did participate in that first draw and you took funding in April or May, June, in that time frame, and you want to apply for funding in this second phase, or really the third phase, that would be considered second draw funding. Okay, and so that's important to realize the difference between that, because there is a difference in the level of funding that you can receive based on first draw or second draw. So let's talk a little bit about what that means. Number one, in order to be eligible for PPP funding at all, you have to have been a business in operation prior to February 15th, 2020, or have been a seasonal employer that was dormant or not fully operating as of February 15, 2020, but had been in operations for a 12-week period between the time frame of February 15th, 2019 and February 15th, 2020. So the majority of the members I would say the vast majority, if not all, of the members of the Hispanic Chamber would meet this eligibility requirement, right? You were in business prior to February 15th, 2020. You need to meet all of the SBA eligibility requirements, and I'm not going to go over those necessarily. There's a long list of those, but I also provided Tanya with the list, the SBA website for PPP, and that's a good source to go to see what the SBA eligibility requirements For first draw funding, so again, if you did not take PPP funding last year, you need to, one of the other eligibility requirements is you need to have 500 or fewer employees, and again, satisfy the SBA eligibility requirements. If you are looking for second draw funding, the SBA changed the parameters for the program for the second draw, and they're only accepting applications from those employers with 300 or less employees. So if you've got 400 or I'm sorry 301 or more employees, even if you got first draw funding from the SBA for PPP, you're not eligible for second draw funding. Okay. In the second draw funding as well, another requirement, you have to have used all or will use all of the loan proceeds from your first PPP loan before the disbursement of the second PPP loan. That was actually one of the questions that had been submitted to Tanya before this meeting was, if I haven't used all of my money yet, do I have to use it before I get second draw funding? And the answer to that is yes. You have to have exhausted all the funding for that in order to apply for second draw funding. And the other requirement for second draw funding is you have to demonstrate that at least 25, you have to show at least a 25% reduction in gross receipts or revenues during the appropriate quarter or annual time period. So, if you can prove that your annual revenue last year declined by 25%, then you would be eligible for second draw PPP funding, provided that you meet the other SBA eligibility requirements and you've got 300 or fewer employees. Okay. So assuming that you meet those requirements and whether it's first draw or second draw, then the next question would be, okay, where do I apply, right? The majority of the financial institutions, at least the majority of the ones here in El Paso and surrounding community, did participate in PPP funding last year, right? There was a lot of work that was done. I think my banking counterparts, at the community banks or at the regional or national banks here in El Paso, all of us were participating in this. All of us spent a lot of time working on this last summer, in the early part of the summer. None of us took vacation. We were heavily steeped in this project. I am hearing that there are several financial institutions that have opted out of the second draw PPP funding. It was very time consuming. It was very expensive, and the costs associated with PPP, processing those applications, it just doesn't make sense for some lenders to participate in the second draw. I'm happy to say that Wells Fargo is participating in second draw funding for PPP. We opened up our online portal last week on the 19th of January, and we started accepting applications through our online portals, either business online banking or through our commercial electronic office portal. If you're a client of Wells Fargo, you're familiar with those platforms. So the other question would be, if I got my first draw funding from another bank, but now they're not participating, what are my options? Okay. So one of the SBA requirements going back to first draw funding last year was that we also need to comply with the know your customer requirements for federal regulations. And so in order to do that, many of the financial institutions determined that we were only going to service PPP requests for our existing customers, because that's how we could comply with federal regulation to prove that we know who our customers are. We've done all of our due diligence. We know that Joe Smith is the owner of this company because he opened an account with Wells Fargo prior to February 15th. So we know that the company was operating and in existence, and so we can meet all of the SBA requirements for that. And that's the position that the majority of the financial institutions took. We did end up seeing a lot of clients that for whatever reason, they didn't meet some of those requirements. They didn't have a checking account, even though in some cases they were a borrowing customer. I heard stories of, early on in PPP last year, they had online banking, they had credit cards, they had other things, but they didn't have a business checking account with a certain financial institution, and they were locked out from the PPP process. There's a reason behind that, right? We were all trying to meet federal regulations. With Wells Fargo, we do have the requirement that people that apply, companies that apply for PPP with us, they did have to have a banking relationship, a checking account at minimum with the bank prior to February 15th. And again, it's in order to comply with federal regulation. With certain financial institutions and the second draw funding, I know at Wells Fargo as an example, we've got clients who opted to go and get their first round of PPP funding from another financial institution. As long as they were banking clients of Wells Fargo prior to February 15th, we can process their second draw funding of PPP. That's not an issue, regardless of whether or not they got first round funding with us. If there's a company out there that didn't get first draw funding, and so they're coming in for first draw funding, obviously they would be eligible as well. And obviously anybody that did get first draw funding with Wells Fargo can certainly go to any other financial institution and get second draw funding as well. So there's quite a bit of flexibility with regard to where people can apply for their second draw funding, or if they're applying for first draw funding right now as well. So then the question is, how much can I borrow with PPP, right? It all depends on, are you looking for first draw funding or are you looking for second draw funding? So if a company right now, again, didn't participate in PPP last year, you're looking for first draw funding, you would fall under the parameters from last year, right? So you can borrow up to 2.5 times your average monthly payroll costs during the relevant period. Seasonal borrowers can also borrow up to 2.5 times, and it doesn't have to be the last 2.5 months. It can be whatever again, if you're a seasonal employer, let's say farming and things like that, your peak period would be sometime in the summertime, let's say, right? So you can pick a 12-week period then and base your average payroll costs off of that period. Another question that came into Tanya before the meeting was, how do I prove that this is 2.5 months of payroll? The SBA put some parameters forward, and a lot of work was done by the financial institutions to show that what the employers were giving us was the correct information. And we actually had to run our own calculations as lending institutions and compare that with what the borrowers submitted, and then we would submit that to the SBA that we had verified those calculations. So again, it's based on 2.5 months of your payroll, your average payroll costs. The maximum loan amount for first draw PPP funding is $10 million or $20 million in aggregate for a single corporate group. So let's say you've got a parent company that's got 3 or 4 different sub corporations. As it rolls up to the parent company, you can't get more than $20 million. Okay, the majority of the small businesses here in El Paso are not going to come anywhere near that $20 million number. But I know a lot of people saw some articles last year coming out that sports franchises and there were some large restaurant franchises, some hospitality franchises that were taking advantage of certain situations. And that's why the SBA came back and provided some clarification around the total corporate roll up, and that was $20 million. If for second round funding, it's not nearly as lucrative as it was in first round funding. So the maximum loan amount for second round funding is $2 million. And in aggregate, it would be $4 million for a single corporate group. Okay, so you can see that's 5 times less than the first draw funding. And the reason for that is with the second round, with the stimulus package that was passed in late December, Congress really, and the SBA really wanted to focus on core small businesses, right? We saw a great number of larger companies that were trying to take advantage of PPP, not because of need, but because of uncertainty around the situation. And so as a result, there were many small businesses that got locked out. We all know that, with the first phase of the first draw funding last year, the PPP funding was exhausted in about 2.5 weeks. And that's why Congress came back and passed additional stimulus and opened it back up and provided some additional funding. So, really the focus here should be on small businesses that really need this money. And that's why the SBA has changed their eligibility requirements, moving it from 500 employees to 300 employees, and then changing the amount that people can apply for from $10 million to $2 million. Because the focus rightfully should be on small businesses that need this money to stay open, okay? So I think I've answered one of the questions around, do I have to pay the second loan? Well, actually, no, I answered the question around, do I have to pay my first loan back before I get second loan funding? In the event that you were forgiven for first loan funding, you're not going to pay that back. Again, it was forgiven. You do have to get that forgiveness before you get second round draw funding. And then the answer to that question would be, do I have to pay the second loan back? Well, the answer would be no. There will be forgiveness for that program as well, as long as you meet the requirements to qualify for forgiveness. If you don't meet those requirements for forgiveness, just like with the first draw funding, then you would be required to pay that loan back. Again, it would be a loan with a low interest rate and a 5-year payback. So really not even that onerous of loan terms. I think any of us that have gotten a commercial loan before, you'd say, oh, can I get a 1% loan for 5 years? Sign me up, right? But if you can get it forgiven, all the better.
Mr.
Yes.
McGrath, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to add there, since we are getting some questions from attendees, what
Sure.
would be some reasons why a business would not qualify for loan forgiveness?
Yeah, primarily because you did not retain the necessary number of employees in order to meet the requirements for the SBA, or you didn't use the money appropriately. So you didn't use a certain percentage for payroll costs. And that percentage, I believe it's 60%. That was an ever-changing number last year with the SBA and the guidance that they were providing. I think that it ended up at 60%. But those would primarily be the reasons that you cannot prove that you used the money appropriately the first time around.
Awesome. Yeah, that's why it is very important to keep track of all the receipts, the payroll. That way, when you are ready to apply for forgiveness, you can prove that you use your funds correctly. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, and there we see the importance also. One of the things that I always tell our small business clients, it's really, I understand that CPAs are really expensive. I get that, right? And for a lot of small businesses, they're not big enough to really require a CPA. But at minimum, you've got to have a pretty good, either a bookkeeper on payroll or one that you partner with to provide those services, because they're really worth their weight in gold, especially when you're looking for somebody to keep track of receipts, keep track of expenses, and make sure that they're watching your bottom line and your expenses to make sure that you qualify for forgiveness for this. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, so that actually answers one of the questions that was sent beforehand also. How can I prove that I used 60% on payroll? So that would be, all of the documentation that you submitted to your lending institution on the front end in order to get the PPP. That would be the information that you would provide to your lending institution on the back end to prove that you spent at least 60% on payroll, right? Let's see. One of the questions that was asked, and is really, really funny. I laugh because it really all depends. But the question is, how fast will I get the money once my application is approved? Funding through the SBA was actually pretty quick once it was actually approved. Early on, the problem was getting approval, right? And so, like I mentioned on the front end, there was a lot of work being done by the financial institutions and their staffs. You know, I know for a fact that a lot of the community banks here in El Paso really took an all hands-on approach, and they had team members in conference rooms, you know, going through PPP applications all day, every day, you know, working 60 to 80 hours a week, trying to get these things processed. So there was a huge glut. There was a lot of demand, and so really the big problem on the front end wasn't necessarily the SBA funding these loans. It was, you know, getting kind of the pig through the python, right? Making, you know, you had all of these loans going in at the same time. You had to have people processing those loans. So that did take quite a bit of time. And I know that, you know, all of the financial institutions, we apologize to our clients for the amount of time that it took to get those processed, but you know, it was a lot of demand. I know, you know, with the first draw funding for PPP, Wells Fargo funded over 195,000 PPP loans across the country, and
wow.
yeah, and a significant number here in the El Paso and Southern New Mexico communities that I oversee. So, or I should say, El Paso and New Mexico community that I oversee. So there were a lot of PPP requests, and a lot, in some cases, there was some back and forth with clients because, again, a lot of uncertainty around the eligibility requirements, a lot of uncertainty around the calculations because the guidance was changing. So there was a lot of back and forth between the lending institution and the clients because we needed to make sure that the numbers were correct, and we didn't want our clients either under applying or in some cases over applying for funds based on, you know, miscalculations and things like that. So I will say much more streamlined process this time around. The feedback that I'm getting for the group that's handling PPP now within Wells Fargo is that our portal is working great. You know, we're processing things very timely, and I'm sure the same situation is, you know, can be applied to the other lending institutions in town. As with anything, once you get more experience doing something, you get better and better at it. So, you know, we've had 10 months now to look at this and hone our process and make sure that we're doing things the right way and we're doing things as expeditiously as possible.
That is awesome. I know it like 10 months ago, it was new. It was something new for all your employees, for clients. I remember being on the phone all day because they had questions on the PPP, on the application requirements, and it was a lot. It was a lot, and the thing is that they kept changing it.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Let's see. One of the questions that was asked is there a deadline to apply? And right now, I believe that the deadline that was established by the SBA was March 31st for funding. Again, subject to change. I think within anytime you have one of these government programs, you have to put that disclaimer out there that that's obviously subject to change. But I would also say, please don't wait, right? If you're a small business and you really need this funding right now, don't wait to apply. Apply as quickly as you can. Go to your lending institution. If your lending institution is not participating in this, hopefully, you know, you've got an account somewhere else and you can get in with another lender. It's critically important. I mean, I would hate for what happened in the first phase last year, you know, where it was 2.5 weeks and then it was exhausted. I mean, if that were the case, I think that we would look to Congress again. Something would probably be passed, and I know that there's a lot of chatter out there that you know, there's another stimulus package that's in the works. I know that the Biden administration is working on that and working to try and get you know, both parties engaged on this and get bipartisan support for some form of stimulus package. Depending on what side of the aisle you sit on, you know, it's either too big or it's too small. So, again, that's the political game that we're in right now. It's unfortunate that we do have this political struggle going on, and it's not anything new. This has been going on for years and years. But unfortunately, the small businesses are caught in the middle of this political struggle, and these are the people that really need the funding. So, yeah. So I would say don't hesitate to apply. The follow-up question to that, is there a deadline? Is will the money run out? And again, the money ran out last year after 2.5 weeks, but then Congress stepped up and provided additional funding, and there was about $100 billion that went unfunded in that second phase of the first draw. So it's really anybody's guess on what the demand is going to be this time around. I will tell you, I don't see nearly as much chatter in the media right now around the second draw funding for PPP being exhausted. Again, that was all the news. Early April last year was, how long is PPP going to last? And I'm not seeing that right now in the financial services industry. And I would say primarily because, the SBA changed the requirements, right? I mean, it really is. There's a much more focused strategy and attention around small businesses. And, your small businesses, they're not looking for $2 million in funding. They're looking for $50,000. Well, I'm really proud to say that Wells Fargo's average loan size for PPP last year was around $55,000. So it wasn't like we were prioritizing, $10 million PPP loans. Again, this wasn't a money-making venture for any of the banks. So that certainly was not a strategy that we were trying to employ. We really wanted to get the money to where it needed to be, right? We wanted to fund small businesses. So I'm proud of the fact that our average PPP loan size was about $55,000, and that more than half of the PPP loans that we funded went to small businesses with less than 10 employees. Because really that's where you talk about Wall Street meeting Main Street. And I know that Cindy likes to talk about Main Street and things, and that really is that's where the strength of a large financial institution was backing these Main Street small businesses that really needed the funding. One of the questions that was out there is there a cash advance available for PPP? Unfortunately, there's not. It's not a program where we can go out and advance funds in anticipation of you getting approval for PPP. It's really something that has to be applied for. You've got to go through the process. Again, all of us are working really hard on this. We're trying to get this done as expeditiously as possible, and we hope that the funding happens really quickly for everybody. Another question that was asked: are businesses that are currently in bankruptcy eligible for PPP? That's a great question, and I didn't immediately know the answer to that, and so I actually went out to the SBA website to see. There's not a whole lot of information on that. My first inclination would be to say no, that's not a possibility. I guess the question that could be raised is what sort of bankruptcy proceedings are you going through? Is it Chapter 7? Is it Chapter 11? There are differences between the two. One is a reorganization, meaning you do plan to continue to function as a business. You're just reorganizing your activities. The other meaning I'm going out of business. Well, obviously, if you're going out of business, then you're not a business that would really need PPP funding at this point. So I would think that would be a kick out. I'm not exactly sure on the reorganization bankruptcy proceedings. Again, my inclination would be no. Just because there are other secured creditors that are out there that have a place in the bankruptcy proceedings. So I would think that would preclude you from applying for PPP, but I do not know that for a fact. So that's something that I owe you, Tanya, and I will find out the answer to that. And maybe if you can send that out to the attendees for this meeting, I would appreciate that.
Awesome. Yes. Anything that you would like to send us, I can provide to our attendees. Thank you.
Yep. And again, one of the last questions that Tanya was asked leading up to this meeting is, I still have money left for my first PPP loan. can I still apply for the second round? I think that I've touched on that previously, but just to reiterate, that first round funding does need to be exhausted before you can apply for second round funding. I would add that if you still have first round PPP funding there, I would be concerned around the eligibility for forgiveness, because there was a certain amount of time that you had in order to use that first round of PPP funding. Otherwise, you needed to give it back if it wasn't used. So I would be concerned around eligibility for forgiveness at this point. You can always return the money and you don't have to repay it. But I obviously, to answer the question, you do need to exhaust those funds before you can apply for second round PPP funds. So, Tanya.
Or in that case, give the money back, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
But awesome. prior to payments actually starting to have to be made, because there's a certain amount of time that you have before you're required to start making payments on your PPP loan. And again, a lot of that depends on when you got your first draw funding. If you got it prior to June 5th or after June 5th, there are certain stipulations around that. I would say, exactly what you said, Tanya. Yeah.
Okay, so awesome.
Having said that, Tanya, I've made my way through most of the list. Again, it tied in pretty well to the FAQ that we've got for externally for not just Wells Fargo clients, but anybody. We can send that out. I sent it to Tanya. She's gonna send that out to everybody. That's a pretty exhaustive FAQ list. Again, we also sent the SBA website out, so there's really great information there as well. But at this point, Tanya, if you want to open it up for questions, I'm more than willing to try and answer anything that I can.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mr. McGrath. And yeah, going back to the resources that you share with us, I just wanted to let our attendees know that I submitted those links in the chat box. So those are available. The first one is a Wells Fargo external for clients. It's actually the PPP website. And then the second one is the SBA PPP website. So what I can do is, after this webinar is over, I can also send it via email to our attendees. But right now, we actually received some questions. And let's see, we have a question from Ms. Margarita, and she's asking, can I bring back employees if I get the second round of PPP?
Can you bring back employees if you get the second draw funding for people? Absolutely. I think that's actually one of the things that you would want to do with that second draw funding is, and really in order to qualify for forgiveness as well, is one of the requirements is that you bring back people, right? That you retain employees. So absolutely, and that's what the hope is. I mean, that's why they call it paycheck protection, because we're trying to protect the paychecks of these employees and bring them back to work. One of the things that, quite frankly, as we were going through PPP last year, especially in the first round, one of the other measures of the stimulus, the CARES Act, the first stimulus act, was really aggressive and additional funding for unemployment. And so, small businesses that had to lay employees off as a result of the COVID-19 situation, their employees were getting an extra $600 a week in unemployment. And so, $2,400 a month in extra unemployment on top of the unemployment that they were already getting. In some cases, these employees were making more money on unemployment than they were at their employer. And so there was no financial incentive to go back to work. And that was a really big problem that a lot of our small business clients expressed to us was, I want to bring back my employees. I need to bring back my employees in order to qualify for forgiveness, right? I took this money from the SBA. I've got to spend 60% of it on payroll, but I can't bring the people back because the government's giving them too much money in unemployment. So again, there was no financial incentive for displaced or laid off employees to go back to work. With this most recent stimulus package that was passed by Congress, and they upped it to $300 a week in additional unemployment. So less of an incentive, right? But it's still an extra $1,200 a month, every 4 weeks, that could potentially provide a disincentive, depending on how much money your employee makes. It could or could not provide a disincentive for them to come back. So I know that some of my friends over at Workforce Solutions, they would tell us, and there's one on the board actually that would say, I hope that they don't continue the additional unemployment, because there are jobs out there, and I think for our small business members out there, we know you guys were the ones that had these jobs, and you guys were the ones that couldn't bring people back. So I'm right there with you guys. I think that it's really important to again support people in their hour of need, but not provide a disincentive for them to get back to work.
Awesome. Yes. Actually, as you know, here at the chamber, we focus on small businesses. Mm-hmm. And we were helping clients to complete the application, guiding them to our financial institutions. And a lot of them were facing the same issue. Mm-hmm. They couldn't bring their employees back because they were getting so much money with the unemployment. Yeah. And I mean, they couldn't qualify for forgiveness, or they really had a hard time with that. Yeah. So we got this question is from a Zoom attendee. He's asking, do you recommend that I have my CPA helping me to complete the loan forgiveness application? I guess he's asking if he needs the CPA to do it.
Well, tough to answer that question, and I certainly it's a tough question to answer, only because look, knowing how CPAs work, right? Anytime you engage your CPA, if you've got a CPA, right? Again, worth their weight in gold. I mean, I absolutely think that if you're a small business and you're of size, you absolutely need a CPA. Do you absolutely need them to apply for PPP? No, probably not. You could probably ask them for the information that you need, financial statements, things like that, your payroll documentation. You could ask for that, and then that would be the extent of it, right? Because you're just going to provide that to your lending institution in order to apply for the second draw funding or first draw funding, as it might be. But I am cognizant of the fact that anytime you email, call, access your CPA, you're paying. Those are billable hours, right? And so, to the extent that a small business is struggling, you probably want to limit those billable hours. But I did certainly see a lot of value in CPAs at least being a participant, not the primary owner of a PPP application, but a participant in the process. And again, whether it's a CPA or a bookkeeper, whoever you engage with to keep you on track financially, I think that they should be a participant in this process, just if anything to keep you on the right track and make sure that you're going through the process correctly.
Right, thank you. And I am glad that we got this question, because when I do counseling, I find out that a lot of small business owners don't have a CPA or a bookkeeper. They do everything for the business. They do the numbers, they do employees, they serve clients. So I always tell them, like, if you can, go get a CPA, let the professionals do their job, right? Yep. But yes, so going to
and again, Tanya, sorry to cut you off, but it really all depends on the size of the company, right? I mean, right. If you're a small business and you're generating, I would say less than $100,000 in revenue with your small business, it's going to be really tough for you to see the value in paying somebody to do your financials. I mean, I get it. I mean, as a financial institution, again, I caution small businesses that it's always valuable to have that person doing that, because this is their profession, right? The small business owner, they're really good at what they do. That's why they started this small business. But that CPA, that bookkeeper, that financial professional, they're really good at what they do. That's why they're in business, right? And so it keeps
Right.
everybody out of hot water.
Yes, and as a business owner, you already need to take care of a lot of things, the marketing, the employees, the product or the service.
That's
So
right.
it is very helpful to have a CPA.
Absolutely.
Next question. So this attendee is saying that he received the idle cash advance. So the question is, do I still qualify for the first PPP loan?
That's a great question. And to answer that, I'm going to access, there's actually, this is a line item in our FAQs. And so I'm going to read directly from the Wells Fargo external website on PPP around what if I have an EIDL advance or loan. And it reads, EIDL advances, not loans, EIDL advances will no longer be deducted by the SBA from forgiveness amounts. Borrowers may be able to refinance EIDL loans funded between January 31, 2020 and April 3, 2020 with their first PPP loan. Borrowers cannot refinance an EIDL loan with a second draw PPP loan. And then it says, for any questions, please contact the SBA EIDL program. And there's information on the SBA website for that. So the answer to that would be advances will no longer be deducted from by the SBA for forgiveness. But then as far as loans are concerned, you could, if you had an EIDL loan prior to, or that was funded between January 31 and April 3, you could include that, or you could refinance that with your PPP, but post April 3rd, you could not, if you were funded post April 3rd, or if you're looking for second draw funding, that cannot be refinanced with this funding.
Awesome. There you have it. We have one last question. So if you're attendee and you're watching, you still have time to submit your questions. If you're watching on Facebook, you can do it via the comment box or through Messenger. And if you're watching us here on Zoom, you can do it through the Q&A box right here. So going back to our last question, what is the maximum amount that I need to have in order to qualify for loan forgiveness?
Okay, so let me make sure that I understand. What is the maximum amount?
So yes, to request to be approved for loan forgiveness. It is, if I'm not mistaken, 150K, right?
Okay, got it. Yes.
Yeah.
So yes, my understanding is that loan, and again, this was guidance that was changed over the course of PPP's history last year. But I believe that you're right, Tanya. Anything less than 150,000, I think, was automatically forgiven. Anything greater than 150,000, you needed to go through and prove your forgiveness. I believe that you're correct on that.
So just adding into that, I believe that if you got less than 150K, there's a simplified way to get loan forgiveness. Mm-hmm. They have only a one-page
yes,
application, and it's easier. So there you have it.
You're right. I misspoke. It's not automatically forgiven, but it's a much more streamlined process. That's correct.
Yes, it's a more simplified application. It shouldn't take too long. And it's also available. Well, here we already shared the resources and the SBA and the Wells Fargo. But again, thank you to all our attendees for being here today. If you have any questions, you can call the chamber. We would be more than happy to help you. Also, if Mr. Ryan wants to share more information, we will make sure to share that with our attendees. Is there anything else you would like to add, Mr. Ryan?
No, I just, again, thank you, Tanya, for the opportunity. Cindy reached out to me a couple weeks ago, and there's a lot going on, obviously, with federal stimulus packages and different programs and things like that. And so I'm honored that Cindy thought of me. It's great to touch base with membership again. And if there's anything that I or Wells Fargo can do for any of our small business members, the Hispanic Chamber here in the community, please don't hesitate to reach out. Let us know. We're here to support you.
Thank you so much. And on behalf of the El Paso Hispanic Chamber, we appreciate everything that you do as a board member. Thank you. Thank you to your Wells Fargo team. And of course, thank you for being here today. And thank you to our attendees.
Thank you so much.
See you next time.